The sound of thunder rolling across the valley had nothing to do with the clear blue Montana sky overhead, and everything to do with the dozen horses charging past Kendrick Jensen's fence line, their riders whooping and firing pistols into the air as they tore through his northern pasture in the summer of 1878. Kendrick stood on his porch, rifle already in hand but pointed downward, watching the chaos unfold with the resigned patience of a man who had learned that some battles were not worth fighting. His ranch stretched across 300 acres of rough Montana territory just outside the small town of Wyatt, and while he had built every fence and barn with his own 2 hands over the past 7 years, he had also learned when to let fools pass through without interference. The riders were drunk or bored or both, and they would be gone in minutes, leaving nothing but hoof prints and dust in their wake. He was 32 years old and had been alone on this land for all 7 of those years, save for the occasional hired hand during roundup season. The loneliness had become like a second skin, something he wore without thinking about it most days. He had come to Montana with dreams that seemed foolish now, dreams of building something lasting, of having a family to fill the house he had constructed with such care. The house had 4 bedrooms, which seemed like a cruel joke some days. He slept in one, and the others stood empty, collecting dust and silence. The riders disappeared over the ridge, their noise fading into the distance, and Kendrick was about to turn back inside when he noticed something they had left behind. Not something, someone. A wagon sat tilted at an awkward angle near the creek that cut through his property, one wheel clearly broken. A woman stood beside it, her black dress stark against the golden grass, and even from this distance, Kendrick could see the way she swayed slightly, as though she might collapse at any moment. He moved without thinking, long legs carrying him down the porch steps and across the yard toward his horse. Within minutes, he was riding toward the creek, his mind already cataloging what he would need to repair a wagon wheel. As he drew closer, he could see the woman more clearly. She was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that had come partially loose, tendrils escaping to frame a face that was pale with exhaustion or illness or both. She turned as he approached, and he saw her hand move to something at her waist, perhaps a knife. He stopped his horse several yards away and held up both hands, showing he meant no harm. "Madam," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. He rarely spoke to anyone these days. "Looks like you could use some help." She studied him with dark eyes that held a wariness he understood. "Out here, trust could get you killed. Those men," she said, her voice hoarse. "They spooked my horse, ran straight into a hole and broke the wheel when the wagon tipped. Where's your horse now?" She gestured vaguely toward the west. "Ran off. All my supplies were in the wagon." Kendrick dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. As he got closer, he could see that her black dress was not just severe but also a widow's weeds, the fabric dusty and stained from travel. Her face was drawn and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard miles. "You are headed somewhere specific?" he asked, examining the broken wheel. It was beyond simple repair. The axle was cracked too. "Wyatt," she said. "I heard there might be work there. Teaching, maybe, or keeping house for someone." "You came from where?" She hesitated, and he saw her consider whether to answer. "Colorado. My husband died 3 months ago. Fever. There was nothing left for me there. His family made it clear I was not welcome without him, and our own place was mortgaged to the bank." Kendrick nodded, understanding the story without needing more details. The West was full of such tales, people displaced by death or debt or disappointment, always moving, always hoping the next place would be better. "This wagon is not going anywhere," he said. "The wheel is broken and the axle is cracked. You will need a new one built, and that will take time and money." She closed her eyes briefly, and he saw her shoulders slump. "I do not have much money." "How far were you from Wyatt?" "I do not know. I have been traveling for 2 weeks. I thought I was close." "You are about 8 miles out," he told her. "But you are not going to make it on foot, not in this heat, not without supplies." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw her trying to assess what kind of man he was, whether he was offering help or something else entirely. He was used to that look. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard he kept trimmed short. He knew he could be intimidating, though he had never wished to be. "I am not asking for charity," she said, lifting her chin. "I can work. I can cook and clean and mend. I know herbs and healing. I can repay any help." "I am not asking for repayment," Kendrick said. "My ranch is about a mile from here. You can stay there while we figure out what to do about your wagon and getting you to Wyatt." "Why would you do that?" she asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice, as though kindness was a foreign concept. He met her eyes, these dark eyes that held too much pain for someone so young, and said simply, "Because I can." She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. "I do not even know your name, Kendrick Jensen. This is my land you are standing on." "Delilah Harper," she said quietly. "I am grateful for your help, Mr. Jensen, but I do not want you to think that I am the kind of woman who would take advantage of a man's kindness." "I do not think that," he said. "I think you are someone who needs help, and I have help to give. That is all there is to it." He loaded what he could from her wagon onto his horse, securing the bundles carefully. There was not much, just a trunk of clothes, some cooking supplies, a few books, and a small wooden box that she held carefully, as though it contained something precious. He did not ask what was in it. The walk back to his ranch was quiet, with Delilah following behind his horse, clearly trying to keep up despite her obvious exhaustion. Halfway there, Kendrick stopped and dismounted. "You should ride," he said. "I can walk." "You can barely stand," he said, not unkindly. "Please, ride." She looked like she wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her, swaying again. She nodded, and he helped her up onto his horse, then took the reins and led the animal the rest of the way home. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, and he heard her quick intake of breath. He tried to see it through her eyes, this house he had built with such hope. It was not fancy, but it was solid, 2 stories of good timber with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The barn was equally well built, and there were several smaller outbuildings, all kept in good repair. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes, madam. It is a beautiful place. Thank you." He helped her down from the horse and led her to the house, opening the door to the kitchen. It was clean because he kept it that way, but it had the sparse quality of a place where only one person lived, where meals were functional rather than joyful. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. "I will get you some water." She sat carefully, as though afraid the chair might break beneath her, and accepted the cup he handed her. She drank deeply, and he could see her hands shaking slightly as she set the cup down. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning. I had some bread and cheese, but it ran out." He moved to the stove, building up the fire, and began preparing a meal. He was not a fancy cook, but he could manage the basics, and he had supplies enough for both of them. While beans heated and cornbread baked, he sliced some of the smoked venison he had hanging in the cold cellar and set out butter and jam. Delilah watched him with those dark eyes, and he could feel her gaze on him as he worked. "You are very kind," she said quietly. "I am just doing what anyone should do. But most people would not. Most people would have ridden past." He could not argue with that, so he said nothing. When the food was ready, he set it on the table and sat across from her. She ate slowly at first, as though her stomach needed to remember what food was, then with more enthusiasm. He was glad to see it. She was too thin, her cheekbones too prominent, her wrists fragile looking beneath the cuffs of her dress. "Tell me about Wyatt," she said after a while. "Is it a good town?" "It is small. Maybe 200 people. There is a general store, a saloon, a church, a blacksmith. The schoolhouse already has a teacher, an older woman named Mrs. Patterson, but she has been talking about retiring. As for housekeeping work, there might be opportunities. The boarding house is run by a woman named Mrs. Chen, and she sometimes needs help." Delilah nodded, absorbing this information. "And you, what brought you to Montana?" "The same thing that brings most people. A chance to build something of my own. I worked cattle drives for years, saved every penny and bought this land 7 years ago. It has been hard work, but it is mine." "Do you run cattle?" "Some. Mostly horses. I breed and train them, sell them to the army and to ranchers who need good stock. It is steadier than cattle, and I prefer working with horses." "I like horses," she said softly. "My father had a mare when I was young, a sweet-tempered bay named Honey. I used to ride her through the fields near our house." "Where was that?" "Ohio, a lifetime ago." He heard the sadness in her voice and did not press. They finished the meal in comfortable silence, and then he showed her to one of the empty bedrooms upstairs. It had a bed with a real mattress, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the valley. "This is too much," she said, looking around the room. "It has been empty for 7 years. It might as well be put to use. But people will talk. A widow staying at a bachelor's ranch. Let them talk. You need a place to stay, and I have the room. That is all that matters." She turned to him, and he saw tears in her eyes. "I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me. Just rest. We can figure out the next steps tomorrow." He left her there, closing the door quietly behind him, and went back downstairs. He stood in his kitchen, listening to the silence that had been his constant companion for so long, and realized it felt different now. The house felt different. There was someone else breathing within these walls, someone else's footsteps overhead, and it made the place feel less like a monument to his loneliness and more like an actual home. That night, Kendrick lay in his own bed and listened to the sounds of Delilah moving around in the room down the hall. He heard water pouring into the basin, heard the soft sounds of her getting ready for sleep, and felt something in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. Not attraction, exactly, though she was beautiful in a quiet, understated way. It was more a sense of rightness, as though something that had been out of place had finally settled where it belonged. He told himself not to be a fool. She was a widow, grieving and lost, and she would stay only as long as it took to sort out her affairs and move on to whatever life awaited her in Wyatt. He was just providing temporary shelter, nothing more. But as he drifted off to sleep, he allowed himself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if she stayed. The next morning, Kendrick woke before dawn, as he always did, and went about his chores. He fed the horses, mucked out stalls, repaired a section of fence that had been sagging, and checked on the small herd of cattle grazing in the east pasture. By the time he returned to the house, the sun was well up, and he could smell coffee brewing. Delilah was in the kitchen, wearing the same black dress but looking considerably more rested. She had found his coffee and had figured out how to work the stove, and there were eggs frying in a pan and biscuits baking in the oven. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I know. But I wanted to. You helped me. The least I can do is make breakfast." They ate together, and he found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone, of having conversation over coffee. She asked about the ranch, and he told her about the horses he was currently training, about the land and how it changed with the seasons. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she understood more about ranching than he would have expected. "My husband's family had a small ranch," she explained. "I learned some things, though they never let me do much. They did not think it was proper work for a woman. That is foolish. Some of the best riders I have known were women." She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her face, and he felt his heart skip in a way that warned him he was in danger of becoming far too interested in this woman who was only passing through his life. After breakfast, they rode out to where her wagon still sat by the creek. In the light of day, the damage looked even worse. The wheel was completely shattered, and the axle had cracked clean through. "I can salvage some of the wood," Kendrick said, examining it. "But you would be better off selling what is left and buying passage on the stage when it comes through Wyatt next week." "I do not have money for stage passage. Then we will figure something else out. Why are you being so kind to me?" She asked again, and this time there was less suspicion and more genuine curiosity. He straightened, looking at her across the wreckage of her wagon. "Because I know what it is like to be alone and afraid. Because I have been fortunate, and that fortune should be shared. Because you needed help and I could give it. Take your pick." "You are not what I expected," she said softly. "What did you expect? Someone who would want something in return. Everyone wants something. I am not everyone." They worked together to unload the rest of her belongings from the wagon, piling them to be carried back to the ranch later. As they worked, Delilah told him more about her journey, about leaving Colorado with almost nothing, about the kindness and cruelty she had encountered along the way. She had been robbed once, she said, by men who took what little money she had hidden in her trunk. She had been helped by a family of travelers who shared their food. She had slept in barns and under stars, and once in an abandoned soddy that leaked rain. "Why Wyatt?" he asked. "Why here specifically? I met a woman in Wyoming, a trader's wife. She told me Wyatt was a decent place, that people there were fair. It seemed as good a destination as any. And if there is no work there," she met his eyes, "then I will keep moving until I find somewhere that will have me." The determination in her voice was clear, and he admired her for it. She had been knocked down by life, but she was not staying down. She was fighting in her own quiet way to build something new. Over the next few days, they fell into an easy rhythm. Kendrick worked his ranch, and Delilah threw herself into making herself useful. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, washing windows and scrubbing floors and beating dust from curtains that had hung undisturbed for years. She cooked meals that were far better than anything he had managed on his own, making use of his supplies in ways he had never considered. She mended his clothes, patched holes in his work shirts and replaced buttons and repaired tears with tiny, precise stitches. "You do not have to do all this," he told her one evening, watching her work by lamplight on one of his shirts. "I know, but I want to feel useful. You have given me so much. This is what I can give back. You are not in debt to me, Delilah, maybe not. But I am grateful, and gratitude demands expression." He let it go, understanding that she needed this, needed to feel like she was contributing rather than simply taking. He could respect that. On the fourth day, he rode into Wyatt to pick up supplies and to inquire about work for Delilah. The town was exactly as he had described it, small and dusty and functional. He stopped at the general store first, speaking with the owner, a man named Samuel Wright who had been there almost as long as the town itself. "Work for a widow, you say?" Samuel asked, stroking his gray beard thoughtfully. "Mrs. Chen at the boarding house mentioned she could use help with laundry and cooking. Pay would not be much, but it would include room and board." "That might work. Is Mrs. Patterson still planning to retire from teaching? She is, but the town council has not found a replacement yet. Is this widow a teacher? She is educated. She might be qualified. Samuel gave him a long look. This widow got a name, Delilah Harper, and she is staying where exactly? At my ranch, temporarily. Samuel's eyebrows rose and Kendrick could see the speculation in his eyes. That's so. You taking in strays now, Kendrick? She needed help. I had the means to provide it. Mighty charitable of you. Kendrick heard the implication in his tone and felt a flash of irritation. It is not like that. She is a decent woman who fell on hard times. I would hope anyone would do the same. Sure. No offense meant. Just surprised is all. You have kept to yourself for so long, folks figured you liked it that way. I do. But that does not mean I turn away someone in need. He finished his shopping quickly and rode back to the ranch, troubled by the conversation. He had known there would be talk, but he had not fully considered how it might affect Delilah. She was already vulnerable, already struggling to rebuild her life. The last thing she needed was to be the subject of small-town gossip. When he arrived home, he found her in the garden plot behind the house, pulling weeds from between the rows of vegetables he had planted weeks ago and largely neglected since. She looked up as he approached, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "How was town?" she asked. "Fine. I spoke with the general store owner. There might be work at the boarding house and the teaching position might be coming available." Her face brightened. "Really? That would be wonderful. There is one complication." "What?" "People are talking about you staying here." He saw the light fade from her eyes, replaced by resignation. "Of course they are. I was foolish to think otherwise. It does not matter what they think. It does, though. It always does. If I am going to live in Wyatt, I cannot have a reputation as a woman of loose morals. No one will hire me, and no one will trust me around their children." She was right, and they both knew it. Kendrick felt frustration building in his chest, anger at a world that would judge this woman harshly for accepting help when she desperately needed it. "We could tell people we are engaged," he said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. Delilah stared at him. "What?" "If we say we are engaged, then there is nothing improper about you staying here. When the time comes, we can say you changed your mind and you can move into town with your reputation intact. That is lying. It is a white lie to protect your good name." She shook her head slowly. "I cannot ask you to do that. People would have expectations. They would watch us, judge us, and when we broke it off, they would judge you too. I can handle judgment. But why would you? You do not even know me. Why would you tie yourself to me, even falsely, just to protect my reputation?" He looked at her, this woman who had come into his life like a sudden storm, disrupting the careful loneliness he had built around himself. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve a fair chance to build a life here. Because I can help, and so I will." "Because you can," she echoed, and there was something in her voice, a softness that had not been there before. "Yes." She was silent for a long time, and he could see her thinking, weighing options, considering consequences. Finally, she nodded. "All right, if you are sure." "I am sure." "Then I accept, but only until I can establish myself in town. I will not trap you in this longer than necessary." "I do not feel trapped." That was true, he realized. Despite the sudden complication, despite the fact that his simple act of kindness had become considerably more complex, he did not regret it. Having Delilah here felt right in a way he could not fully explain, and if pretending an engagement was what it took to keep her safe and give her a chance at a new life, then that was what he would do. The next Sunday, they rode into Wyatt together for church services. Delilah wore her black dress, though she had added a cream-colored shawl that softened the severity of it, and she had done something different with her hair, pulling it back but leaving soft curls to frame her face. She looked beautiful, and Kendrick found himself acutely aware of the glances they attracted as they entered the small white church. He introduced her to people after the service, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back in a gesture that was both protective and proprietary. "This is Delilah Harper," he said. "My fiancée." The word felt strange in his mouth, but he said it firmly, meeting people's eyes with a steady gaze that dared them to question him. Most people were polite, offering congratulations and welcoming Delilah to Wyatt. A few women looked skeptical, their eyes sharp as they assessed this newcomer, who had apparently captured the attention of the town's most eligible and elusive bachelor. Mrs. Chen, the boarding house owner, was a tiny Chinese woman with iron-gray hair and sharp black eyes. She looked Delilah up and down and then nodded once as though satisfied by what she saw. "You need work?" she asked directly. "I do," Delilah said. "Mr. Jensen mentioned you might need help." "I need help with laundry, cooking, cleaning, hard work, long hours, but fair pay and good food." "I am not afraid of hard work." "Good. You come tomorrow morning, we talk more." Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, was a motherly woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. She invited them to her small house for tea after the service, and they sat in her parlor while she quizzed Delilah about her education. "I went to a female academy in Ohio," Delilah explained. "I studied literature, mathematics, history, and French. After I married, I taught Sunday school to the children in our town. The town council has been dragging their feet about finding my replacement," Mrs. Patterson said. "They want someone educated, but they also want someone who will stay. Too many teachers have come and gone, leaving the children disrupted. If you are planning to settle here to marry Mr. Jensen and make a life in Wyatt, then you would be an ideal candidate." Delilah glanced at Kendrick, and he saw the uncertainty in her eyes. The lie was growing, taking on a life of its own, and he could see it troubled her. "We have not set a date yet," Kendrick said carefully. "Delilah's husband passed away recently. We are being respectful of her mourning period." Of course," Mrs. Patterson said. "But when you are ready, the position will likely be available. I plan to retire at the end of the summer term." As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Delilah was quiet, her hands tight on the reins of the gentle mare Kendrick had let her borrow. "You are troubled," he said. "This feels wrong, all these lies." "They are not entirely lies. You did go to a female academy. You are living at my ranch. The only lie is the nature of our relationship. But it is a significant lie, and it is growing. Now Mrs. Patterson thinks I will be here permanently, that we will actually marry. We can tell her the truth when the time comes, that we realized we were not suited, that we decided to part as friends. And in the meantime, what? We pretend to be in love." The question hung in the air between them, and Kendrick found he did not have a good answer. "We do not have to pretend anything. We are friends. That much is true. We enjoy each other's company. That is also true. People can believe what they want beyond that." She nodded slowly, but said nothing more. That night, Kendrick lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house settling and wondering what he had gotten himself into. The plan had seemed simple at first. Help a woman in need, protect her reputation with a harmless fiction, and eventually go their separate ways. But nothing about this was turning out to be simple. The truth was, he was beginning to care for Delilah in a way that went beyond simple kindness or Christian charity. He enjoyed her company, looked forward to meals with her, found himself listening for her footsteps in the house. He liked the way she hummed while she worked, liked the small changes she had made to his home that made it feel warmer and more lived in. He liked the sound of her laugh, rare but genuine when it came. he realized with a mixture of joy and terror, falling in love with her. But she was a widow, still mourning her husband, and she had made it clear that she saw this arrangement as temporary. The last thing he wanted was to make her uncomfortable or to take advantage of her vulnerable position. So he said nothing, kept his growing feelings to himself, and tried to be content with whatever time they had. Delilah started working at the boarding house the following week, and Kendrick saw less of her during the days. She would rise early, ride into town on the mare he had given her to use, and return in the evenings tired but satisfied with her work. Mrs. Chen, she reported, was demanding but fair, and the work was exactly what Delilah needed to feel useful and independent. On her day off, she would help Kendrick around the ranch, and he found himself teaching her things he had never expected to teach anyone. How to doctor a horse's split hoof, how to mend a broken fence properly, how to read the signs of weather coming in over the mountains. She was a quick learner, asking intelligent questions and remembering everything he told her. One afternoon in late July, they were working together to move a small herd of horses from one pasture to another when a summer storm rolled in with dramatic suddenness. One moment the sky was clear, and the next, lightning was cracking across the valley and rain was sheeting down in torrents. They ran for the barn, laughing and soaked through by the time they reached shelter. Inside, they stood catching their breath, and Kendrick became acutely aware of how the wet fabric of Delilah's dress clung to her figure, how her hair had come loose and hung in dark waves around her shoulders, how her eyes sparkled with laughter. "That came on fast," she said, wringing water from her skirt. "Montana storms usually do." They stood in the warm dimness of the barn, listening to the rain hammer on the roof, and Kendrick felt the space between them charged with something he could not quite name. Delilah looked up at him, and her laughter faded, replaced by an expression that was more serious, more searching. "Kendrick," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I have been thinking about this situation, about our arrangement, and I realize I have not been entirely fair to you." "What do you mean?" "You have been nothing but kind and generous, and I have been holding you at arm's length because I was afraid. Afraid of being hurt again, afraid of depending on someone, afraid of feeling too much too soon after losing Thomas. You do not have to explain, but I do. Because the truth is, I am not holding you at arm's length anymore. I have not been for a while now. I care about you, Kendrick. More than I should, perhaps, more than is wise given how we met and the circumstances we are in. But I care about you nonetheless." His heart was pounding. "Delilah, let me finish. I know this started as a convenience, a way to protect my reputation while I got on my feet. But it has become more than that, at least for me. Being here, working beside you, living in your home, I have seen the kind of man you are. You are good and decent and kind in a way that I did not think existed anymore. And I find myself wanting this to be real, wanting the lie we have been telling to become the truth." He stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "You mean that?" "I do. But I also know that I might be asking too much. You agreed to help a stranger, not to marry her in truth. If you want to continue as we have been, with this remaining a fiction, I will understand. I will still be grateful for everything you have done." Kendrick crossed the space between them in 2 strides, and before he could think better of it, before caution could override instinct, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. She made a small sound of surprise, and then her arms were around his neck, and she was kissing him back, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. The rain pounded overhead, the horses shifted in their stalls, and Kendrick lost himself in the sweetness of this moment, this woman, this unexpected joy. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I have been half in love with you since the first day I saw you standing by your broken wagon, he admitted. I told myself it was foolish, that you were just passing through, that I should not let myself feel this way, but I could not help it. You have changed everything, Delilah. This house, this ranch, my whole life, everything is better with you in it. Then let us make it real, she whispered. Let us turn this fiction into truth. Are you sure? You are still in mourning. People will talk. Let them talk. I cared for Thomas and I grieved him. But our marriage was not a great love story. We were practical, sensible. We made sense on paper but not in our hearts. What I feel for you is different. It is wild and impractical and probably too fast, but it is real. It is so very real. He kissed her again, slower this time, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally left the barn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Kendrick felt as though his life had just begun again, as though everything that came before had been prologue to this moment. That evening, they sat on the porch and talked for hours about everything and nothing, about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Delilah told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents who had died when she was young, about the aunt who had raised her with strict propriety and little warmth. She told him about marrying Thomas because it seemed like the right thing to do, because she was alone and he offered stability, but how she had always felt like something was missing. Kendrick told her about his own family, about growing up poor in Kansas, about his father who drank and his mother who died young from exhaustion and heartbreak. He told her about leaving home at 16, about working cattle drives and saving every penny, about the dream of owning land that had sustained him through years of hard, lonely work. I built this place for a family I did not have, he said. I thought maybe if I built it, they would come. But years passed and I was still alone. I had started to think maybe I was meant to be alone, that this was just how my life would be. And now, she asked softly, now I think maybe I was just waiting for you. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and they sat like that as the stars came out, and the night settled around them. In the weeks that followed, they made their relationship known to the town, and if people were surprised by how quickly things had progressed, most kept their opinions to themselves. Mrs. Patterson was delighted, already planning to hand the school over to Delilah in the fall. Mrs. Chen gave Delilah a knowing look and told her that she had always been a good judge of character, and that Mr. Jensen was clearly a man worth keeping. Samuel Wright at the general store offered his congratulations and told Kendrick he had better make an honest woman of her soon before someone else came along and swept her off her feet. Kendrick bought a ring that very day, a simple gold band with a small sapphire, and proposed properly that evening, on one knee in the garden where he had first told Delilah about the pretend engagement. I know I already asked you, or rather we agreed to pretend, but I want to do this right. Delilah Harper, will you marry me? Not as a fiction or a convenience, but as a real and true joining of our lives and our hearts. She was crying as she said yes, and he slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her there among the tomatoes and beans, with fireflies beginning to spark in the gathering dusk. They were married in late August, in the small white church with most of Wyatt in attendance. Delilah wore a dress of cream silk that one of the women in town had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Kendrick had picked that morning. He wore his best suit, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her with a joy so profound, it felt like his chest might burst. The town threw them a party after the ceremony, with food and dancing and music from a fiddle player who had come over from a neighboring ranch. Kendrick danced with his bride, holding her close and marveling at how his life had changed in just a few short months. "Happy," he murmured into her ear. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied. That night, they returned to the ranch house that was now truly their home, and Kendrick carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. He set her down in the kitchen, and she turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me that day by the creek, for not riding past, for taking a chance on a stranger, for giving me a home and a life and a love I never expected to find. You do not have to thank me for any of that. You have given me just as much, more even. Then we are even." "Then we are even," he agreed and kissed her again, and carried her upstairs to the bedroom that had once been empty and was now filled with her things, with their things, with the life they were building together. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and their life together settled into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. Delilah took over the teaching position at the school, and Kendrick would sometimes stop by during the day to see her working with the children, her face animated as she taught them reading and arithmetic and history. The children adored her, and she bloomed under their attention and affection. At home, they worked side by side on the ranch, and Delilah proved to have a natural way with the horses. She was gentle but firm, patient but persistent, and the animals responded to her with a trust that sometimes took Kendrick weeks to earn. Together, they expanded the breeding program, carefully selecting mares and stallions to produce the kind of horses that would be sought after across Montana and beyond. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch or by the fire, depending on the season, and talk or read or simply enjoy each other's presence. Kendrick had never been much of a talker before Delilah, but with her, he found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he had kept locked away for years. She listened with her whole attention, asking questions that showed she cared not just about the facts but about how he felt, what he thought, what he dreamed. They made love with a passion that surprised them both, discovering each other slowly and thoroughly, learning what brought pleasure and joy. Delilah had been shy at first, her experience with her first husband limited and not particularly satisfying, but Kendrick was patient and attentive, and she quickly learned to voice her desires and to take her own pleasure as well as give it. Winter came, bringing snow that piled in drifts against the fences and turned the world into a landscape of white and gray. They spent those long, dark months snug in their home, keeping the fires burning and the animals tended. It was during one of those quiet winter evenings as they sat together reading that Delilah made an announcement. "I am pregnant," she said simply, looking up from her book. Kendrick stared at her, the words taking a moment to penetrate. Then a grin spread across his face and he whooped with joy, scooping her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "Are you sure?" he demanded. "I am sure. I have been feeling poorly in the mornings and I have missed my courses twice now. I spoke with Mrs. Chen, who has delivered enough babies to know the signs. She thinks the baby will come in early summer." "A baby," he said almost reverently. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Delilah, I am over the moon. I am beyond happy. I cannot even think of a word big enough for what I am feeling." She laughed, her eyes shining. "Good, because I am a little scared, to be honest. I have never done this before. We will do it together, just like everything else." And they did. Kendrick was attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting Delilah rest more and work less, much to her exasperation. She felt fine, she insisted. Pregnant women had been working and living their lives since the beginning of time. But she also appreciated his concern, the way he would rub her feet at night when they swelled, the way he made sure she ate well and did not overexert herself. Mrs. Chen took Delilah under her wing, teaching her about childbirth and infant care, sharing wisdom from her own culture as well as practical advice from years of experience. The women of Wyatt rallied around as well, bringing gifts and offering advice and promising to help when the time came. In June of 1879, on a warm night when the stars were bright and clear, Delilah went into labor. Kendrick rode into town to fetch Mrs. Chen and the doctor, and then he paced the house while Delilah labored upstairs, attended by Mrs. Chen and two other women from town. It was the longest night of his life, hearing her cries of pain and being helpless to do anything about it. But when dawn broke and he heard the sharp cry of a newborn, everything else fell away. Mrs. Chen appeared at the top of the stairs, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy with good lungs." Kendrick took the stairs two at a time and entered the bedroom to find Delilah propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. He approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at his son. The baby was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Kendrick had ever seen. "Can I hold him?" he asked. Delilah smiled and carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Kendrick held his son with infinite care, marveling at the weight of him, the realness of him. This was his child, his and Delilah's, a person who would carry their legacy forward into the future. "What should we name him?" Delilah asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything. Kendrick looked down at his son, at this tiny person who had changed everything, and said, James Kendrick Jensen. "After your father. No, after no one. This is his own name for his own life." "James," Delilah said, testing it. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The baby quieted at the sound of his mother's voice, and Kendrick sat carefully on the edge of the bed, still holding his son. Delilah leaned against him, and the three of them stayed like that as the sun rose fully and spilled golden light through the window. Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and more wonderful than Kendrick could have imagined. James was a good baby for the most part, though he had a temper when he was hungry and did not like to sleep for more than a few hours at a stretch. Kendrick and Delilah took turns walking him at night, soothing him when he cried, marveling at every small change and development. Delilah took a break from teaching to care for James, but she planned to return in the fall, with one of the town girls hired to help with childcare. Kendrick found himself more productive than ever, motivated by the need to provide for his growing family. The ranch prospered, his horses gaining a reputation for quality and temperament that brought buyers from across the territory. When James was 6 months old, sitting up on his own and beginning to show a personality that was equal parts stubborn and sweet, Delilah announced that she was pregnant again. "Already," Kendrick said, though he was grinning as he said it. "Apparently. Are you disappointed?" "Not even a little bit. I love our life, Delilah. I love our family. I would be happy to have a dozen children if you were willing." "Let us see how we manage with 2 before we talk about a dozen," she said dryly. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born in the spring of 1880. She was smaller than James had been, with Delilah's dark eyes and a sweet temperament that was the opposite of her brother's fierce personality. James, now toddling around and getting into everything, was fascinated by his baby sister, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feedings. Kendrick had never been so tired or so happy. His days were filled with work and his nights with family, and he felt a contentment that went bone deep. This was what he had built the ranch for, what he had worked toward all those years. Not just land and horses and a house, but this: a family, a home, a life full of love and laughter and the beautiful chaos of children. As the years passed, Kendrick and Delilah settled into their roles as parents and partners, working together to raise their children and run the ranch. They had two more children, another son named Henry born in 1882, and a daughter named Clara in 1884. The house that had once been too empty was now too full, bursting with noise and energy and life. Kendrick would sometimes think back to that day by the creek, when he had seen a woman standing beside a broken wagon and had made the choice to help. It had seemed like a small thing at the time, a simple act of kindness with no expectation of return, but it had changed everything. That one choice had led to this entire life, to this family, to this love that filled every corner of his heart. "You ever regret it?" Delilah asked him one night, many years later, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. James was 13 now, tall and serious, helping Henry build something with scrap wood. Rose and Clara were making flower crowns, their laughter bright in the evening air. "Regret what?" "Stopping that day, taking in a stranger, getting yourself tangled up with a widow you did not know." He looked at her, this woman who had been a stranger and was now as essential to him as breathing. "Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah. You and our children, this life we have built. I would not change a moment of it." She smiled and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I feel the same way. Sometimes I think about where I would have ended up if you had ridden past that day, if you had not stopped to help. I would have made it to Wyatt eventually, I suppose, but I would not have found this. I would not have found you. I am glad I stopped. I am glad you did too. I asked you why, and you said because you could, but I think it was more than that. I think it was fate. I think we were meant to find each other. Maybe we were." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The ranch stretched out around them, 300 acres of land they had worked and nurtured together, and it had never felt more like home. Inside the house, the rooms that had once been empty were now filled with the clutter of family life. Toys and books and clothes, crayon drawings pinned to walls, muddy boots by the door. The kitchen that Kendrick had once used only to fuel his solitary existence was now the heart of the home, where Delilah cooked meals that brought everyone together, and where conversations and laughter flowed freely. The barn held not just horses, but also a milk cow, chickens, and the various creatures their children had adopted over the years. A three-legged cat, a dog of uncertain parentage, a rabbit that Clara had rescued from a hawk. The garden that Delilah had first weeded all those years ago now sprawled across a quarter-acre, producing vegetables and herbs and flowers in abundance. This was not the life Kendrick had imagined when he first bought this land. It was better. It was richer and fuller, and more complicated and more beautiful than anything he could have dreamed. As the children grew older, they each began to show their own interests and talents. James loved the horses as much as Kendrick did and spent every free moment in the barn, learning everything his father could teach him about breeding and training. Rose had her mother's gentle way with people and announced at age 10 that she wanted to be a teacher like Delilah. Henry was fascinated by how things worked and could often be found taking apart and reassembling anything mechanical he could get his hands on. Clara, the youngest, was wild and free-spirited, more comfortable outside than in, happiest when she was riding or climbing trees or exploring the far corners of the ranch. Delilah continued teaching at the school, now with Rose sometimes helping her with the younger children. She had become a pillar of the Wyatt community, respected and loved for her dedication to education and her kindness to everyone she met. Kendrick served on the town council, helping to make decisions about roads and water rights and the thousand small matters that affected the growing community. They had built a life not just for themselves, but as part of something larger. They were woven into the fabric of Wyatt, contributing to its growth and stability, raising children who would carry the town into the future. In 1890, when James turned 11, he asked his father about the story of how his parents had met. They were in the barn, working on training a young gelding, and the question came out of nowhere. "Ma said you found her by the creek when her wagon broke. Is that true?" "It is true." "And you just helped her, even though you did not know her?" "I did." Why? Kendrick paused in his work, thinking about that question, that same question Delilah had asked him all those years ago. Because she needed help and I could give it, because it was the right thing to do. "But you must have known it would change things, that helping her would complicate your life." "I suppose I did, somewhere in the back of my mind, but it did not matter. She needed help and I had the means to provide it. The rest just followed from there." James was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "I hope I can be like that, like you, seeing someone who needs help and just giving it without thinking about what I will get in return." Kendrick felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You already are like that, son. You are kind and generous and good. You get that from your mother as much as from me. But you are the one who stopped. You are the one who made the choice that led to everything else. Maybe. But your mother is the one who had the courage to accept help, who trusted a stranger and allowed him into her life. That took bravery I cannot even imagine." They finished with the gelding and turned him out into the pasture, watching as the young horse kicked up his heels and galloped off to join the small herd. "I am glad you stopped," James said. "I am glad you helped her." "Me too, son, me too." That evening at dinner, with the whole family gathered around the big table Kendrick had built to accommodate their growing household, he looked around at the faces of his wife and children and felt a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. Every laugh, every argument over who got the last biscuit, every story told and retold, every moment of this noisy, chaotic, beautiful life was a gift. After the children were in bed, Kendrick and Delilah sat together on the porch as they did most nights, watching the stars emerge one by one. "James asked me today about how we met," Kendrick said. "What did you tell him? The truth, that I saw someone who needed help and I provided it." "That is a very simple version of a complicated story." "Maybe, but at its heart that is what it was. You needed help, I could give it." Everything else grew from there. Delilah was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. "I think about that day often, about how close I came to never finding this, never finding you, if those men had not spooked my horse, if the wagon had broken somewhere else. If you had been in a different part of your ranch that day, so many small things that could have gone differently. But they did not. They happened exactly as they were meant to, and we found each other. You believe that things happen as they are meant to?" He considered the question seriously. "I do not know if I believe in fate exactly, but I believe that we make choices every day and those choices matter. I chose to help you. You chose to trust me. We both chose to take a risk on something that seemed impossible, and those choices led us here." "I would make the same choices again," Delilah said. "Every single one." "So would I." She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they sat like that until the night grew too cold and they went inside to the warmth of their home. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their children. James grew into a young man who was thoughtful and hardworking, with his father's quiet strength and his mother's compassion. At 18, he began courting a girl from a neighboring ranch. a smart, capable young woman named Sarah who shared his love of horses. Rose followed her mother into teaching, starting at the school in Wyatt when she turned 16. She had a natural way with children and a patience that seemed boundless. Henry, at 14, was already talking about going to study engineering somewhere, though the idea of one of their children leaving made Delilah's heart ache. Clara, at 12, was still wild and free, resistant to the constraints of dresses and manners, more comfortable in her brother's old work clothes than in anything traditionally feminine. Kendrick and Delilah, now in their 40s, had grown gray at the temples and gained the lines and calluses that came from decades of hard work. But they were healthy and strong, and their love had only deepened with time. They knew each other completely now, knew each other's rhythms and moods, could communicate with a look or a touch. They had weathered arguments and hardships, droughts and hard winters, the normal struggles of any long marriage, and had come through it all stronger. In 1895, when Kendrick was 49 and Delilah was 43, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from across the county. The ranch was filled with friends and neighbors, with music and dancing and food and laughter. Their children were there, along with James's fiancée Sarah, and Delilah's students past and present, and the people of Wyatt who had become family over the years. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Kendrick and Delilah stood on their porch, looking out over the land they had built a life on. 16 years, Delilah said. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean. Sometimes I feel like we have been together forever. Other times I remember that first day by the creek like it was yesterday. Do you remember what I asked you? Why? You asked me why I was helping you, and you said because you could. I did. It was a good answer, simple and true. It was the only answer I had, the only one that mattered. She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. I want you to know something. These have been the best years of my life. This life we have built together, this family, this home, it is more than I ever dreamed of having. You gave me that, Kendrick. You gave me everything. You gave me just as much, more. You gave me a reason to build this place into a real home instead of just a house. You gave me a family and a purpose and a love that makes every day worth living. Then we are truly even. Then we are truly even. He kissed her there on the porch, with 16 years of marriage behind them and hopefully many more ahead, and felt the same rush of joy and rightness that he had felt that day in the barn when they had first kissed in the rain. The years that followed were good ones. James married Sarah, and they built a house on the far edge of the ranch, starting their own family while working alongside Kendrick to expand the horse breeding operation. Rose continued teaching and eventually married a young doctor who came to Wyatt to take over the practice from the aging doctor. Morrison. Henry did go off to study engineering, but he came back every summer and eventually returned for good, bringing new ideas and innovations that helped modernize the ranch operations. Clara, to everyone's surprise, became interested in veterinary medicine after helping deliver a difficult foal, and she studied with Dr. Morrison, and then Henry's wife's cousin, who was a veterinarian in Helena. Kendrick and Delilah became grandparents, first to James and Sarah's son, then to a parade of grandchildren from all their children. The house that had once been too empty was now filled with the sounds of multiple generations, and Kendrick often thought about how different his life could have been if he had made a different choice that day by the creek. He and Delilah grew old together, their bodies slowing but their spirits still strong. They still sat on the porch most evenings, still talked about everything and nothing, still reached for each other in the night. Their love had weathered time and hardship and had emerged tempered and true. In the spring of 1910, when Kendrick was 64 and Delilah was 58, they took a trip back to the creek where they had first met. It had been over 30 years, but the place was unchanged, the water still burbling over stones, the grass still golden in the late afternoon sun. "This is where it started," Delilah said, standing where her wagon had broken all those years ago. "This is where everything changed," Kendrick agreed. "If I could go back and tell that frightened young widow what her life would become, I do not think she would believe me." "What would you tell her?" "That she is about to meet a man who will change everything, that he will take her in for no reason other than kindness, that she will fall in love with him and build a life more beautiful than anything she has imagined, that she will have children and grandchildren and decades of happiness, that every hard thing she has endured will be worth it because it will lead her here, to this moment, to this life." Kendrick felt tears in his eyes. "And if I could go back and tell that lonely rancher what he was about to find when he rode down to investigate that broken wagon, what would you tell him? That he is about to meet the love of his life, that helping this stranger will be the best decision he ever makes, that his empty house will be filled with laughter and love, that he will never be lonely again." They stood together by the creek, holding hands, and Kendrick thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a simple question and an even simpler answer. "Why would you help me?" "Because I can." But it had become so much more than that. It had become a marriage that spanned decades, a family that spread across generations, a legacy of love and kindness that would continue long after they were gone. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the day I saw you standing here, looking lost and afraid and determined to keep going anyway. I love you too. You saved my life that day, Kendrick, not just from hunger or hardship, but from a life that would have been small and lonely and gray. You gave me color and warmth and joy. We gave that to each other." "Yes, we did." They walked back to where they had left their horses, mounted up and rode back toward the ranch. As they crested the ridge, they could see their home spread out below them, the house and barns and outbuildings, the pastures with horses grazing, the corrals where James was working with his sons, the garden where Rose's children were helping their grandmother pick vegetables. This was their legacy. Not just land and buildings, but family and love and the ripples of that one act of kindness spreading out across the years. Kendrick and Delilah lived many more years, watching their grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. They worked as long as their bodies allowed, then gradually stepped back, letting the younger generation take over while they enjoyed the fruits of their decades of labor. When Kendrick finally passed away in 1920 at the age of 74, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Delilah beside him. She followed him 2 years later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and dates and a single inscription: "Because we could." Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued the ranch, building on the foundation that Kendrick and Delilah had laid. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can change everything. The house still stood, renovated and expanded over the years, but still recognizably the home that Kendrick had built with such hope. The barn where they had first kissed in the rain still sheltered horses. The garden still produced vegetables and flowers. The creek still ran through the property, marking the spot where a lonely rancher had found a widow in need and had made a choice that would echo across generations. And if you stood very quiet on the porch on a summer evening, you could almost hear them. The sound of Kendrick's deep laugh, the gentle melody of Delilah's voice, the echo of a love story that had started with a broken wagon and a simple question, and had grown into something beautiful and lasting and true. Their great-great-granddaughter, standing on that same porch 90 years after Kendrick first helped Delilah, often thought about them. She had heard the stories all her life, had seen the old photographs, had walked the same land they had walked. She understood now what they had built here. Not just a ranch, but a legacy of love and family and the kind of kindness that expected nothing in return. She was teaching her own children the values that Kendrick and Delilah had lived by. Help those who need it, choose kindness over convenience, build something that will last. And when her daughter asked her why they should help a neighbor whose fence had been damaged in a storm, she smiled and said, "Because we can." It was the answer Kendrick had given Delilah all those years ago, and it was still the right answer, the best answer, the only answer that mattered. Because in the end, that was what love was. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but simple choices made day after day to help, to care, to show up, to stay. It was seeing someone in need and offering what you had. It was building a life together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time. Kendrick and Delilah had understood that. They had lived it. And their legacy continued, spreading out across the years like ripples on water, touching lives they would never know, making the world a little bit kinder, a little bit better. The ranch still stood, a testament to what could be built on a foundation of love and kindness. The family still gathered there for holidays and celebrations, filling the house with the same laughter and warmth that Kendrick and Delilah had created all those years ago. The land still produced good horses and good crops and good memories. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave this world, Kendrick and Delilah were together still. Their love as strong in death as it had been in life, watching over the family and the home they had built together, satisfied that their simple choice to help, to love, to build had created something that would last long after they were gone. The end.